Oh, one more thing before I forget.
We've looked at Columbo in a previous video, but we enjoyed that so much we're back looking at Rumpelstiltskin's episodes in detail, one by one.
Do I really look like that?
Columbo.
All right, let's go.
For a general review and overview of Columbo, check out our earlier video. In this video, we'll be looking at each episode in turn, and of course, yes, there will be spoilers, so best not to watch if you've never seen Columbo, but harbour an ambition to do so. We won't be giving everything away, but just enough to not make it worth your while if you want to watch Columbo. Then that's this channel in a nutshell. We'll be making mention of most of the guest stars that stood out, but won't point out all of them, which means we won't fixate on somebody who appeared in one episode of Star Trek. And while there were a number of famous faces appearing in Columbo, you know who didn't appear? Mrs. Columbo.
What are we gonna do?
Just ride it out.
Prescription Murder as a story had already been presented as a television production performed live and as a stage play. Columbo returned to television as a one-off movie in 1968, when television movies were becoming big business for American television networks. In Prescription Murder, Columbo unravels the case of a doctor played by Gene Barry who's bumped off his wife. The doctor manages to avoid suspicion for a while by having his mistress dress up as his wife to stage a very public spat on a plane. Which I guess, if she was angling to become his next wife, was basically a glimpse into their future.
Who are you? Lieutenant Columbo, police.
Columbo here is not quite the gas station lettuce we would know him as, with Peter Falk still finding the character. He also did not yet have the clout that he would later use to dominate the series. Columbo's relatively well dressed and well groomed, but he would also show flashes of anger. The episode ends with Columbo staging a showdown with the suspect, where of course the killer believes he's won the battle of wits with Columbo.
Well, if I killed Carol and there's no proof that I did it for myself.
Spoilers, ultimately nobody wins a battle of wits with Columbo.
Exactly what is your point, Lieutenant?
Point? Oh, I wasn't making a point.
Prescription Murder was a huge hit, and naturally NBC and Universal wanted more episodes, but it would take a while to get Peter Falk on the hook. There was no alternative but to bow to Falk's demands and wishes, since recasting was realistically not on the cards. Professional Peter Falk impersonator, Peter Falk, would just have to hope that the store would allow him to return the coat.
You're a very funny man.
I wasn't trying to be funny.
The stars were aligning, with Falk inching closer to agreeing to return to playing Columbo. But first, a one-off television movie in 1971 would act as a pilot. Ransom for a Dead Man featured something relatively unusual for mystery series at the time, a woman as the killer, and one who was also a high-powered lawyer who decides to kill her husband and then fake his kidnapping. It all seemed to be going well enough, but she also has to contend with her disdainful stepdaughter and this little guy from the police.
I seem to have dropped my pen out here somewhere.
Lee Grant would win an Emmy for her portrayal as the icy killer and the world's fourth worst stepmother, who somehow ends up as a sympathetic figure.
Maybe it's the way you come slouching in here with your shop-worn bag of tricks.
Me? Tricks?
Peter Falk had come much closer to finding a definitive depiction of Columbo, looking like somebody whose pockets were full of torn-up betting slips.
It's interesting.
The suspect takes Columbo for a flight in her plane.
Can you talk yet?
Not yet.
And here's where Columbo starts to be more than just a dogged investigator, but somebody who's not good in various situations. Columbo really hates speed, flying, and heights.
Here's looking at you, Mrs. Williams.
When Columbo returned later in 1971, a new episode would be screened every few weeks, where Columbo episodes would rotate with mystery movies featuring other sleuths. Murder by the Book opened the first season of 6 movies, where it was directed by Steven 1941 Spielberg and written by Steven Koprock Bochco. I wonder whatever happened to those two. A successful author wants to break up his writing partnership with his deadweight colleague, but the colleague gets in first. If that wasn't clear, the colleague kills the author and also the owner of a general store.
You gotta admit I had you going for a while now, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
Martin Milner was in the middle of his stint starring in Adam 12, while Jack Cassidy was married to Shirley Jones and was the father of David and Sean Cassidy, while his granddaughter Katie Cassidy starred in several seasons of Arrow. Jack Cassidy was a smoothie in each of his 3 appearances as a Columbo murderer. It's like being killed by a grand piano dipped in olive oil. The idea of a writing partnership ending in murder was interpreted as a gentle dig on Columbo creators William Link and Richard Levinson.
The clever one, that wasn't yours. The second one, the sloppy one,
That was yours.
Death Lends a Hand features Robert Culp in the first of his 3 appearances as an arrogant, well, that describes 95% of Columbo's killers, and particularly Robert Culp's killers. Columbo enters the crime scene, looks at the likely suspects. The biggest, smuggest prick in the room was likely to have been the murderer. If we had followed that logic at work, Alex Smelly from accounts would be doing consecutive life sentences.
Do you see what I mean?
No, I don't think so.
Culp heads an upscale private investigation firm where, in trying to blackmail someone, he instead ends up killing her, and in some of the series' most visually dazzling moments. This show is all about the contrast of low-rent Columbo with his style cribbed from Schlub Quarterly and his richer, taller and more successful private sector rival, who's undone by a missing contact lens.
You're probably right. You know, my wife, she's always said I don't have enough ambition.
Dead Weight has Eddie Albert as a killer who's also a decorated general, where the killing was witnessed by Suzanne Plachette while she's out sailing. It gets weirder when the general starts to date her, and even weirder behind the scenes when Peter Falk was playing up in his battles with the studio over his desire to direct an episode, which included Peter Falk just not turning up on set. The movie's director finished the episode with Falk's stand-in shot from behind. These scenes are a little bit obvious because the stand-in is rather stiff. When Falk returned to the set to complete the episode, the director had already moved on and the producer stepped in to finish Falk's close-ups. Suzanne Plachette, who'd been a friend of Falk for a while, did not speak to him for a while after this episode, while Eddie Albert was less diplomatic, calling Falk an asshole to his face. I just have visions of Peter Falk's reaction, "Who killed me?" Suitable for framing is about an art critic played by Ross Martin who kills so he can inherit his uncle's art collection. He tries to frame his aunt and also kills his accomplice. Everyone's a critic.
I don't think I understand.
You know what? That's the trouble. Neither do I.
And in a rare move, Columbo discovers gloves in one of the show's most devilish gotchas.
Yes, my fingerprints are on those paintings.
Also in this episode are Kim Hunter and Don Amici, but at no point in this episode does he buy frozen orange juice futures. Also in a rare move, the E word is mentioned.
This is entrapment.
Peter Falk was once asked by a journalist whether Columbo engages in entrapment, and Peter Falk didn't have an answer other than, "Look over there at that breakdancing giraffe," and then hopped into the Columbo mobile for a less than quick getaway an hour later. Does Columbo use entrapment? Most of the time, probably not. There are a few sting operations and a lot of bluff, are all designed to make the killer reveal themselves when Columbo does not have the proof he needs.
The fact that it's not the real contact lens, that doesn't count. What does count is Mr. Brimmer's actions.
Lady in Waiting has Webster's adopted mum kill Oscar Goldman because he forbids her to date Frank Drebin.
Well, that does it.
At first, Susan Clark's character is shown to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but after the killing it appears that her motive was that she could take over the family business that had been run by her brother. Either that or she just needed money so she could pick up all of the Oompa Loompa collection from Kmart. Leslie Nielsen was still at this point a dramatic actor, but he was not considered within the industry a top tier one. Though even here, you can just tell he's busting to break out that fart machine that he used to carry around with him.
All right.
Short Fuse was a last-minute addition to the series, added to the schedule late in the day as part of a deal to allow Peter Falk to direct another episode. Roddy McDowall is a rich playboy who ends up killing his uncle so he can take over the family chemical company. He'd planted a bomb in a cigar case, and when Columbo takes him up in a cable car with a replica bomb, the look on McDowall's face is priceless.
Aren't those supposed to be evidence, Lieutenant Columbo?
Anne Francis is a company secretary and the secret lover to McDowall's character, though really she's just in it for the cigars. The episode was so last minute they clearly didn't have enough time to find a pair of jeans that fit Roddy McDowall without making his voice an octave higher. Short Fuse is also a rare Columbo, one filmed within the allotted 10-day shooting schedule. It's a solid enough episode, nowhere near perfect, but it has one of my favourite gotchas. And now whenever anybody asks me about Silly String, I can say it was in the Columbo episode in 1972.
Can I tell you about my wife?
Mrs. Columbo was beginning to be mentioned more and more often, though of course you never see her. Perhaps because at this time she was in fact away, starring in a touring roadshow production of South Pacific.
Just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Blueprint for Murder has an architect killing a construction magnate, and Columbo thinks the body may have been dumped in the foundations for a new development. The suspect, played by Patrick O'Neill, goads Columbo into going to the trouble and expense of excavating those foundations. No body is found. But then in a sting operation, Columbo follows the architect when he tries to dump the body in the foundations before they're about to be rebuilt.
But what you really wanted was a foolproof hiding place. Now, what's better than a place that's already been searched?
It's not a great episode, but it does have one major purpose. It was designed as a complicated episode to act as Peter Falk's directing debut. The direction's workmanlike but decent enough, but Columbo does not feel like himself. Peter Falk wouldn't direct another Columbo episode, but he still harboured ambitions to write an episode, something he'd eventually do, but not until the 90s. The complications of directing and starring in Columbo made Falk not want to bother with directing again.
Say, how old is he? Kind of hard to say. You see, I just picked him up at the pound. His time was up, if you know what I mean.
Season 2 began with A Jude in Black, one of the best installments of the series. John Cassavetes, one of Falk's pals, stars as a superstar conductor who kills his mistress and is brought low by having dropped a flower from his lapel during the crime. It all leads up to that, but slowly. Columbo as a series was intended to run around 75 minutes in a 90-minute time slot, but A Jude was extended to 2 hours with extra footage and, well, Peter Jackson-style editing, where parts of the episode are almost in real time. Plus there's footage where it's not uncharitable to label as filler.
What are you paying taxes on this place?
It's still a brilliant episode and one of the series' highlights. The networks wanted longer episodes of Columbo. They could sell more commercials in a high-rating show. Peter Falk often wanted the shorter episodes as they were more tightly plotted. But when it came to extend episodes, he would often write many scenes where he's just faffing about.
There are limits, mate, you know.
John Cassavetes seemed to be channeling his disdain for working in television into his character's disdain for, well, what do you got? The conductor character is easily one of the biggest pricks to appear in the series.
Just me.
As in, he's incredibly full of himself. I don't mean he can conduct 2 different orchestras at once. That's just wrong. With the killer being so self-absorbed, it takes the self-effacing, humble, human, scrunchy Columbo to get to grips with how videotape and film playback works in order to provide the gotcha moment. Pat Morita appears in a small role, while Blythe Danner plays the conductor's wife, and James Olsen is a trumpeter who's under suspicion. Realistically, if there's ever a murder near you, the trumpet player is probably the one who's going to confess to the crime whether they did it or not, because, you know, they like to blow their own horn.
That's just an assumption on your part.
Right. Very difficult to prove.
The episode was the first of 2 Columbos directed by actor-director Nicholas Colasanto, who would later play Coach in Cheers. There are 2 versions of this episode, the original intended 70 or so minute version and the extended cut. Which one you watch depends on how much of the killer borrowing his car from a mechanic's, killing his mistress and then returning the car in real time you find is palatable.
Business about the car, I don't think that's very good.
Right. That is thin, yeah, the car.
This episode is where we're introduced to Columbo's aging basset hound, Dog. Since the network wanted some sort of sidekick for Columbo, so why shouldn't Columbo have a canine version of a gas station lettuce?
Wait a minute, you're a great detective. You knew from the very beginning, didn't you?
The greenhouse jungle is a favourite of many, but not mine. They built a greenhouse set, and by thunder they were going to wring every ounce out of it. A fake abduction turns out to be part of a plot to kill the supposed abductee, played by Bradford Dillman. Ray Milland is the killer with the green thumb, but red hands, having killed 2 people according to the Columbo Thermometer. He's a typical Columbo killer, aloof, arrogant and unpleasant, rather like my high school guidance counsellor, who was rather accurately nicknamed Dr. Unemployment. Columbo has a sidekick in this episode of sorts, Sergeant Wilson, who's an admirer of Columbo's record, but at the same time prefers to use the most up-to-date techniques as a detective.
Camera-mounted starlight scope. They use them quite a bit at Berkeley for night work.
Columbo has very little time for Wilson, and at one point lets Wilson walk into a trap in a rather petty way.
You go ahead. Go ahead on your own.
Wilson was played by one of Peter Falk's buddies, Bob Dishy, and the character would appear again in another episode. And this is the episode where Columbo finds the fastest way down a hill. Falk did his own stunt and then did it again several times for different camera angles. The most crucial game sees Robert Culp back as a sports team manager, looking to expand his franchise, but his boss is an uninterested playboy. So during his football team's game, Culp dresses as an ice cream vendor, makes a call to himself to give himself an alibi, then kills poor Dean Stockwell's character with a lump of ice while he's in the swimming pool. Then Columbo shows up and seems to be more interested in how much a pair of shoes cost.
You don't mind if I ask you a personal question, do you?
No.
What'd you pay for those shoes?
The last pair of shoes I bought was about $99. The last pair of shoes I bought was in 1999. I wear a size 9.9. It was a size 10, but that was before the accident with the guillotine.
You don't know where I could get a pair that looks like that for around 16 or 17.
Peter Falk's ad-lib here became a running gag. So the question is Columbo just underpaid or a cheapskate?
And I thought that maybe he noticed you planting those phone bugs and he bought you off.
Valerie Harper appears in a role best described as comedy hooker. History, of course, does not record what size shoes she wore.
Oh, yeah, I knew until I'd broken that alibi, none of these other things would mean much.
It's a solid mystery, even if the gotcha technically works, but unlike Columbo's shoes, it's rather dry.
Well, I thought I struck a chord or something.
No, Columbo, you struck out.
Dagger of the Mind should have been a fun romp, but ends up a little tiresome, like having iron deficiency. Two actors on the London stage accidentally kill their backer and cover up their crime while Columbo arrives in Britain on an exchange program. Columbo tags along with Detective Chief Superintendent Dirk of Scotland Yard while he investigates the death. But Columbo's suspicions are raised by, of all things, everybody acting incredibly suspiciously, which is also ironic and suspicious.
Like that performance you both just gave.
Dagger of the Mind has Richard Basehart, an American playing a British actor, and former Avengers star Honor Blackman as his wife. Almost everybody else in this is a British actor who works in the US, hence people like Wilfred Hyde-White and Bernard Fox, and anyone else who could magic up a serviceable British accent.
What did he say?
His lordship died.
The interiors and some exteriors were filmed in Hollywood, while some location work took place in London, with Peter Falk wandering around London's landmarks, looking as pleased as a pigeon who's just discovered that a sculptor has moved in next door. The butler of the victim decides to blackmail the killers into giving him a job in return for his silence. Now, here's the problem with that. Blackmailing killers always sounds like a smart plan, until you realise somebody who's killed once probably has less problem with doing it a second time. Like how making creme brulee for the first time is super stressful, but if you pull it off, the second time is just that much easier. This episode should be fantastic, but it's like listening to Dickhead Dave trying to read a McDonald's menu. It's 90 minutes of tedium.
They actually liked us.
Success, Your Majesty.
Requiem for a Falling Star has a faded movie star who also owns a movie studio, killing her personal assistant after the assistant became engaged to a gossip columnist, and all because the assistant could possibly reveal the star had previously killed her husband and buried him in the garden. It's a creepy end to a solid episode, but the real horror will be reserved for the home's next owner when they try to put in a swimming pool.
Where is she? Like to get fish.
Columbo phones his wife in this episode, but she wasn't at home, perhaps because she was in fact on an extended trip on the RV Calypso with Jacques Cousteau.
A little overdressed for this time of the day, huh? What do you think? You couldn't care less.
A Stitch in Crime has Mr. Spock trying to kill Grandpa Walton. Leonard Nimoy is an ambitious doctor who performs an operation on his boss, who has the power to block his protege's potential breakthrough. Except the older doctor is not the victim. Well, not yet anyway.
I believe you killed Sharon Martin, and I believe you're trying to kill Dr. Heidemann.
The deadly doctor deals with first a suspicious nurse, played by Anne Francis again, and then a reformed drug addict, played by Jared Martin.
Do you think that we could just talk about the sutures?
The whole story hinges on Nimoy's character having used dissolving sutures on a heart valve replacement on his mentor. It's not an especially amazing episode, but of course, I welcome any program that dared to pop a Spock on it.
I fail to see the virtue in that.
The Most Dangerous Match is not about a matchstick soaked in nitroglycerin, but about a game of chess. Yeah, I was as disappointed as you are. A chess genius played by Lawrence Harvey is deaf and intensely insecure about his chances in a high-profile match against a Russian chess master. Despite the Russian being mostly charming, the American kills him anyway and disposes of the body, he thinks, in a trash compactor. This episode's a bit convoluted, where the only possible killer would have to be deaf, and there's only one deaf person about. What?
Do you really think that the finest chess player in the world would make even half the mistakes that you ascribe to me?
Check and mate, sir.
Martin Landau's uncle is about to marry Catwoman, and so Martin Landau kills the old man. But is it this Martin Landau, the smiling TV chef, or his brother Martin Landau, the super serious banker? The Martin Landaus haven't been on speaking terms for years, but apparently they're fine to collaborate on some murders. It turns out the dead man's lawyer is also unscrupulous, revealing to the twin Landaus that the deceased's latest will would give the bulk of his estate to his yoga-loving fiancée, and so one of the Martin Landaus kills Julie Newmar's character. Only one Martin Landau as a killer would make for a riveting episode, but two Martin Landaus as tag team twin Terminators is glorious.
You must belong in some pigsty.
Columbo, constantly annoying the grieving housekeeper, is a delight, but it's eclipsed only by Columbo trying to cook on live television.
Maybe just the yolk. This goes in here, doesn't it?
No, wait.
Peter Falk again projects so much infectious joy in this mainly improvised scene. It's a really enjoyable episode, though I felt the gotcha was just a tad unearned, coming out of nowhere, like the cyclist that rode into the back of my car while I was loading up. Along with Julie Newmar and Tim O'Connor, there's also Dabney Coleman with a prodigious handlebar moustache, and Mark Singer.
There had to be somebody else waiting down here to replace that fuse.
The third season of Columbo started with Lovely But Lethal, where there's some atmospheric and incredibly creepy camera work at the start, but it is in fact just a story about Vera Miles as a cosmetics maven who kills a young chemist, played by Martin Sheen, after he's developed a new thing that will keep you looking younger longer. Columbo learns something about the cosmetics industry.
I had no idea you had such top secrets in a nice lady's business like this.
Vera Miles' wardrobe gets wackier and wackier with several looks: hosting a high school talent show, Beverly Hills fortune teller, school principal appearing in court charged with possession of cocaine, and driver in the Cannonball Run. At one point, her character kills the chain-smoking assistant of her rival. Because, you know, those things will kill you. Vincent Price as the rival cosmetics boss, who is woefully underused in Columbo, of course. Here, he's realistically just there as a red herring. I mean, Vincent Price as the killer would be the most obvious thing in the world, much like my attempts to park my classic Mini in the trolley return bay at the supermarket.
Would you like to see the corpse?
No thanks, no.
Any old port in a storm sees a winemaker, Adrian Carsini, kill his playboy brother who wants to sell the family winery. But really, he just knocks him out and locks him in a wine cellar with the ventilation switched off for a week so he'll suffocate while Adrian is in New York. This is a story where Columbo and Carsini don't so much as lock horns, but will actually develop a mutual respect by the end of the episode. Almost a friendship. The gotcha is well developed, if just a little over the top. Columbo's prepared to bankrupt himself and the LAPD in order to have Carsini rant loudly about spoiled booze.
Such disdain cannot and must not be tolerated. I advise him not to pay for the check.
The final scene of Columbo sharing some wine with Carsini is touching. Donald Pleasance took a character who on paper was utterly loathsome and made him a character you couldn't help but feel for. I mean, yeah, murderer, but aw. It's an episode with a lot of no's, a fine bouquet. 1973, a good year for wine and Columbos. And of course, Columbo episodes about wine.
That bottle of wine in the restaurant, that was your wine.
Candidate for crime as a politician running for office, killing his campaign manager over a threat to expose the candidate's relationship to his mistress.
I'm from homicide.
Well, you're a little premature, Lieutenant. They haven't got me yet.
Jackie Cooper as the killer hadn't reckoned on Columbo, where Columbo faffs about with a jacket, draws a few diagrams, and eventually catches out the candidate when he tries to fake an assassination attempt. It's a solid rather than brilliant episode, but see if you can spot Peggy Bundy in there, as Katie Seagal's father Boris Seagal directed a couple of Columbos.
Thought I'd mention it.
Robert Culp is back for a third time in Columbo in double exposure. A good episode that's a little disjointed thanks to some scenes being cut out. Culp is a consultant who kills a client and then is projectionist, while Columbo learns the ins and outs of film editing and projection.
That about wraps this up.
Culp had managed to make 3 different killers feel like 3 different people, or more accurately, 3 different assholes. Culp apparently had a range of assholes in his repertoire, so you could hire him for dozens of roles playing an asshole, and like a mobile proctologist, be assured of never seeing the same asshole twice.
Go ahead.
I think you're guilty of homicide.
Publish or Perish has a publisher killing a successful author who was about to go to another company. Here, the publisher got somebody else to do the killing, an unhinged vet, while he made a public spectacle of himself as an alibi. Of course, the best laid plans of mice and men and murderers oft go awry. Columbo's on the case, which for a murderer certainly does classify as awry. Jack Cassidy always played the smoothest killers. They're likably unlikable, where he kills a writer played by actual crime novelist Mickey Spillane. Mariette Hartley's there in a supporting role.
I knew I only told one person, I wasn't sure who. But it was you.
Yes, it was me.
In order to protect his son's academic reputation, a professor at a think tank kills a colleague using a robot to type instructions for a live wargame simulation as his alibi, but then he's screwed because of a match he used to light a cigar at the murder scene. Jose Ferez, the killer, and Jessica Walters, a guest star, in a fairly unusual episode with the closest thing to a science fiction concept in the form of the robot, which of course was Robbie from Forbidden Planet. It does have a weak gotcha when Columbo has the innocent son arrested just to get the professor to confess. Even Columbo's creators, William Link and Richard Levinson, thought this one was pushing things as far as credulity went.
I understand. I think.
Swan Song features Johnny Cash playing a country music star. Yeah, I know it's a stretch, but bear with me. The singer here wants to leave behind his blackmailing manager, played by Ida Lupino, and then, and this one's a doozy, he pilots a light aircraft to a gig, drugs his 2 passengers, and then bails out before the plane crashes. I swear that almost happened to me 3 times while flying Ryanair.
Not bad. Not bad.
Columbo's on the scene, and as usual, he's a big fan of the singer, who turns out to be somebody who learned how to rig a parachute in the military.
Then what are you bugging me for?
Well, like I said, just ask a few routine questions.
Columbo manages to bluff the singer into retrieving some incriminating evidence during a sting. And it's all because of a car rental.
You knew I was coming up here.
I knew. Then I didn't know. And then I know.
A Friend Indeed is a dark episode to end the season. A man kills his wife during an argument and pleads with his friend and neighbour to help out, but only if the first man will kill the neighbour's wife as well. And the neighbour happens to be the Deputy Police Commissioner and Columbo's boss. The Deputy Commissioner kills his wife and then tries to pin the 2 killings on a burglar, while Columbo has to be very careful in how he nabs his boss.
You know, we don't get to see many of these around anymore, especially in this condition.
Well, I try to take good care of it.
This episode has a cool gotcha when Columbo fakes a file on the burglar.
And today you planted him here to incriminate Mr. Jessup. He doesn't live here. I live here.
So if you suspected your boss of being an accessory to 1 murder and the perpetrator of a 2nd killing, do you A. call the cops, B. ask for a big raise and 6 months paid vacation every year written into your contract, or C. all of the above? If it's C, just make sure you do things in the correct order.
You were in it together and you're trying to blame Marty Jessup.
Now we're up to season 4. Exercise and Fatality has Robert Conrad as a gym owner who kills a franchisee but has faked an incoming call in order to provide himself with an alibi. Columbo finds it all too much to be an accident when there are important things like scuff marks on a polished floor. The highlights are Columbo trying to keep up with the killer to interview him during a workout.
You're a devious man.
That's what they tell me.
This is also a rare time when Columbo gets so annoyed that he tells the killer that he's onto him, just before he's actually got all of the evidence.
She thinks you're responsible for the death of her husband. You want to know something? So do I.
Gretchen Corbett takes a break from bailing out Jim Rockford to chill out by the pool.
Guesswork. Supposition. More cigar ashes.
In this episode, Columbo calls his wife to talk about dinner plans. Mrs. Columbo, of course, does not appear due to work commitments after she just accepted the post of Governor General of Canada. Maybe. Negative Reaction is a great story of a celebrated photographer who fakes the kidnapping of his wife and kills her, and then kills the ex-con he hired to help him.
Join us. Eat. An empty stomach is the devil's playground.
Columbo visiting a soup kitchen and being mistaken for a down-and-out was a long time coming.
You sit down and eat, and when you're finished, we'll have a little talk. All right?
Dick Van Dyke, though, was not an obvious choice for a cold-hearted killer. But he is really good in the role, being controlled in the face of Columbo showing up like a Lego in your slippers. His lover was played by Joanna Cameron, who would star in the Saturday morning Secrets of ISIS series.
These people mean absolutely nothing to me.
The gotcha here is all about the fake ransom photo and Columbo managing to get the photographer to incriminate himself by identifying a specific camera on a shelf full of cameras.
Were you a witness to what he just did?
Yes, sir. Witness to what?
You just incriminated yourself, sir.
But look, I can't stay mad at Dick Van Dyke for being a killer. No, I can't. I just can't. I have to forgive and forget. However, there is still the unresolved matter of Mary Poppins.
I want to cry.
In 70s Columbos, the writers did seem to have a problem writing for women, where aside from the victims or the killers, a lot of them seemed to have a main character trait as being on the source. Being the wife of a cold-hearted murderer is a tough gig. You just never know when your expensive rug's going to be ruined by yet more pools of blood after your psycho hubby has snapped.
Well, how clever you are, Lieutenant. You know you fooled even me.
By dawn's early light sees a military academy superintendent sabotage a cannon so it will blow up and kill the president of the academy's board of trustees who wants to turn the failing school into a co-ed facility. Patrick McGowan plays the colonel, a stickler for rules, a martinet, yet he manages not to be overbearing in his dealings with Columbo. Patrick McGowan was the star of The Prisoner and Danger Man, and at the time wasn't an obvious choice for a role in Columbo. But once he was cast, he offered some unsolicited rewrites.
I do believe. Do you? About that.
I see.
He also formed a friendship with Peter Falk, where McGowan would return several times to Columbo to either write, direct, or appear as the killer. One of the cadets was played by Bruno Kirby, while his father, Bruce, was one of a number of Peter Falk's friends who would appear in various supporting roles in episodes.
Up and at 'em, trooper. Let's get with the program.
Troubled Waters is another unusual story, for it sees Columbo and Mrs. Columbo on vacation on a cruise ship. Though, of course, we never actually see Mrs. Columbo, despite her being almost there, just to the left, just off camera.
How the hell do I find you?
Robert Vaughn kills his mistress, and because he's a car dealer, he has a device for copying a key. So he steals a master key, which allows him to traipse across the ship. He's also framed Dean Stockwell, and the ship's captain, played by Patrick McNee, has little choice but to let Columbo do his thing until they reach their next port of call. It's a story where a lot of unusual little things have to line up for this crime to work, but Robert Vaughn's slick businessman routine always works well as a villain. Columbo sets up a makeshift crime lab on the ship, and manages to have a holiday, yet never once bump into Mrs. Columbo, who was always eternally just over yonder.
The hell with it.
Playback sees a murder by an electronics genius who has a 70s version of a smart house that just happens to give him an alibi for his crime, as well as being the vehicle for his downfall.
This is this.
Where we have this really ultra-elaborate, specific setup for a crime that could not have taken place anywhere else except for this one particular location. Now look, you can get a Big Mac at thousands of McDonald's stores around the world, but you can only get a genuine fine burger with pickles, potatoes, peas, prawns, peppers, pineapple and polenta on a prosciutto bun from my kitchen. Sorry, that should read from the trash can in my kitchen. This has a cast that's almost picked at random: Oscar Werner, Jenna Rollins, and Herb Jefferson Jr. from Battlestar Galactica, and Steve Austin's mother, Martha Scott. Peter Falk took a short scene in an art gallery and extended it beyond all necessity, but I'm actually glad he did so, just so we would have something to remember.
Now this here, I see it doesn't have a title.
That, sir, is the ventilator for the air conditioning.
A Deadly State of Mind has George Hamilton as a psychiatrist who accidentally kills the husband of his lover, and when she proves to be an unreliable alibi, he hypnotizes her with instructions to kill herself. Columbo wades into all of this and feels like there is something fishy about the whole endeavor. And that's not just the packet of frozen fish fingers that he left on the backseat of his car all summer.
Well, I'm very sorry.
Leslie Ann Warren played the second victim in an episode with a classic gotcha.
This witness was blind, unless, of course, you had seen this man that day.
Season 5 began with Forgotten Lady, a taut episode about an older movie star, Grace Wheeler, played by Janet Leigh, who fakes the suicide of her ailing husband after he won't finance her latest production. Columbo by now knows all the ins and outs of film projection and splicing. Meanwhile, Columbo is being tracked down by various cops since he's long overdue for testing at the firing range. Columbo doesn't like guns and rarely uses them, mainly because he's pretty useless with them.
Here's my badge. Go down to the pistol range. Take my test for me.
Back at the house, Columbo lays out the case against Grace, not to Grace herself, but to her former dance partner. Turns out she has a degenerative brain illness that means she's likely to be dead within weeks, and the partner swears that he killed the husband.
I came through a rear window. I went up to his room and I shot him.
It's one of the few times where Columbo does not arrest the suspect at the end. The clues were there throughout the episode where Grace cannot remember Columbo's name.
That name is very unusual. I don't for the life of me know why I can't remember it.
It's a really great episode with an ending that sticks with you like glue-flavoured chewing gum. I should also add that glue-flavoured chewing gum is a choking hazard. Don't do it.
Where's your wife?
Mrs. Columbo had been invited to accompany Columbo to Grace's house, but it turns out she may have been teaching karate classes on the opening night of her new dojo. Case of Immunity has Columbo investigating a murder at the location of a made-up Middle Eastern country where Hector Elizondo kills first an official and then his accomplice, played by Sal Mineo.
This is 3rd century. It's worth several $1,000s.
No kidding.
It is a fairly dull episode about diplomatic immunity, enlivened by Columbo once again being a klutz.
I'm sorry, sir.
It's taken this long for Columbo to cross paths with a spy. Leslie Nielsen is murdered by his CIA colleague, played by Patrick McGowan, and Columbo has to try and nail the killer, who's offering subtle threats along the way.
That's my wife's favorite piece of music. I know. You have my house bugged.
When his CIA boss pulls him aside, it's a case of Columbo possibly being in over his head.
I had to
Remove the cold.
Though it's hard to see how a stone-cold killer would just let Columbo walk out of his office alive at the end. Peter Falk was clearly taken by Patrick McGoohan the previous year, and McGoohan would be back again and again. He also directed this episode and would pepper it with references to The Prisoner.
Be seen.
I hope so, sir.
Also in this scene, he's speaking gibberish, which is ironic because long-time viewers of this channel know that pretty much most of the time I'm speaking gibberish.
What are you doing down here?
Taking the air.
A Matter of Honor had the Columbos finishing up a vacation to Mexico, where Columbo is forced into consulting with local detectives over a death at a famous bullfighter's estate. The episode features future soap star A. Martinez, Pedro Armendariz Jr., and Ricardo Montalban as a bullfighting legend who's lost his nerve and killed to keep that a secret. I did that once at the top of a fast water slide. I didn't kill anyone, but I did lose my nerve. I won't say much, but they did have to close the slide for a few days for extensive cleaning. This episode was almost a cursed production, with accidents, bad weather, cost and schedule blowouts, and script problems. The Mexican locations look great, but it's still a rather curious episode.
So inquisitive. I find him amusing.
Even though Mrs. Columbo was in Mexico with her husband, she of course was never seen, thanks to the incident with the surfboard, the Mother Superior, and the stained glass windows of the cathedral. Now you see him as Jack Cassidy's last appearance as a Columbo villain, and my favourite of his 3 appearances. A magician called the Great Santini kills the owner of the club, which is not the Magic Castle, but a Magic Castle-like magic club. In this episode, Columbo learns all about locks and magic tricks and illusions, and he tries to work out how the killer did the deadly thing. It gets darker when the Great Santini appears to have been a former Nazi who's been in hiding all this time, and when he's about to be exposed, he strikes. He's laid low by a typewriter that has a new type of ribbon. Honestly, that's how so many of these gotchas are arrived at. A writer gets a new typewriter, and voila, there's a Columbo in that.
Well, you know how it is, sir. I gotta check out all the leads until I get my man.
Robert Loggia's in this, but he's barely there, in a role that could have been played by anyone. It's not Loggia enough for Robert Loggia. You just don't want to waste your Robert Loggia energy.
That's a new raincoat, isn't it, sir?
It's from my wife.
Mrs. Columbo had given her husband a new coat, but again, she wasn't seen in this episode because she was possibly in Alaska tracking Bigfoot.
I'm gonna leave this coat in the car. Or if somebody tries to lift it, you look the other way.
Last Salute to the Commodore was possibly going to be the last episode of Columbo, and Patrick McGoohan directed this off-tale of the Commodore being killed, where for the longest time, you think the killer is the character played by Robert Vaughn. But then he ends up dead. So it's an inverted Columbo, which itself is an inverted mystery. So inverting this ends up as a normal whodunit, complete with Columbo gathering all of the suspects together to lay out how things unfolded.
And that's what we came up with.
Sounds good on paper, but it's actually one of the few episodes of Columbo I would describe as tiresome, like 2 sleeping tablets washed down with some warm milk. Columbo was a show that did comedy well, though it pains me to say that a Columbo designed to be a little bit funnier than usual was not the best episode of the season.
I need to check up a few things! Is that right, Fred?
As this was possibly going to be the detective's last hurrah, Patrick McGoohan encouraged Peter Falk to go a little bigger with his portrayal of Columbo.
Well, what's the difference?
Columbo in this episode feels like a bad impersonation. He's abrasive, annoying, he has no idea of personal space, where he's often Columbo spreading. It's enjoyable enough to watch.
Tisn't.
But it is clear that Columbo may have just hit the wall. It's not quite Columbo jumping the shark, though there are times in this episode that you are praying for a shark to turn up.
All right, fellas. Give me a minute here, would you?
Season 6 opened with Fade into Murder, an episode that's a little all over the place, but I actually really enjoyed it. William Shatner plays a television detective whom, wardrobe aside, is basically a stand-in for Peter Falk playing Columbo. Shatner plays a well-known TV detective who's the highest paid actor on television, but he's also a royal pain to those he works with. He decides to kill the show's producer in a deli, though he needn't have bothered since the health inspector was about to shut the place down anyway due to the salmonella outbreak. Columbo always seems to light up when he's around show business. But in this one in particular, it's an example of a meta story. A lot of the dialogue about Shatner's character could equally apply to Falk in his controlling and demanding behaviour on set and his battles with the studio. Falk always had one finger in every pie. He must have seen this and yet lapped it up anyway.
Paying an actor that kind of money is insanity.
Now, Now, wait a minute.
Shatner's character gets a little carried away when at some point he seems not to be able to tell the difference between himself and his character. That's either method or it's madness.
Well, whoever said anything about Ward Fowler being under suspicion of murder?
Lieutenant Lucerne did.
It's an enjoyably silly episode in places where Columbo was flummoxed by locks and enchanted by a video cassette recorder.
Because, you don't have the facts, sir.
This is the first of several appearances of Peter Falk's wife, Sheridanese, though it also features William Shatner's Star Trek co-star, Walter Koenig. The two actors, of course, have no scenes together, which, if you've ever gone to a Star Trek convention, is probably for the best. Old-Fashioned Murder is a really dull episode with the curator of a private family museum kills her brother, conspires with the security guard, and then kills him too. Then tries to frame her niece, who might also be her own daughter, and may have killed the girl's father who married her sister. If that doesn't sound like Melrose Place, then fine. But this has all the pace of a lethargic turtle with a limp. Columbo's clue about a watch that displayed the date but needed to be manually reset for each new month is incredibly tedious. But there is one fantastic part. Columbo interviews a hairdresser and ends up getting a fancy haircut for a few scenes.
I've been doing that for so long that I forgot to notice that you weren't upset.
Behind the scenes was far more interesting, with Peter Falk roping in his chum Elaine May to work on the episode script. But things dragged on and on. It was a relatively simple episode, but shooting would drag on and on. Peter Fabelman played the framed security guard and also wrote the teleplay, while the episode's original writer, Columbo stalwart Peter S. Fisher, opted to use a pen name after all of the changes.
I lied about that.
Season 6 of Columbo wound up only being 3 episodes after it ended with the bye-bye sky-high IQ murder case, which is set in a clubhouse for geniuses. I guess my invitation to join was lost in the post. You bastards. One genius has devised an elaborate killing of his friend and colleague who's discovered the first genius's embezzlement from their accounting firm.
Are you aware that I intend to expose you?
Columbo investigates the killing and discovers the attractions of high-end stereo equipment. I found this episode just seemed to drag a bit, but if you want to see Worf's dad kill Boss Hogg, then this is the episode for you. Oh, and Jamie Lee Curtis appears as a waitress in what was a very early role for her. Season 7 saw the last 5 episodes from the show's original run, where the show was now screened as a standalone movie rather than as part of a mystery movie wheel.
People murder out of fear, jealousy, greed, sex, all those things.
A mystery writer kills the husband of her late niece by trapping him in a vault.
Do you really think I didn't know?
While Columbo tries to piece together what happened to the victim's car keys. Gee, I wish he would help me with my car keys. I've been taking the bus for 6 months. Ruth Gordon plays the diminutive killer who believes the victim had caused the death of her niece months ago, and Mariette Hartley is her assistant who knows her employer did it, but instead uses her knowledge to get some perks at work. I'm the same. I won't go into details, but this is more or less why I have a dedicated parking space at work. However, until somebody can help me find my car keys, I'm afraid it's going to be empty.
I'm going to work on it very hard.
A food critic kills a restaurateur that he had been extorting using deadly poison from a blowfish. Louis Jourdan gives us something we hadn't had for a while, a smooth and likably unlikable killer. He's also one of the few killers that makes an attempt on Columbo's life. I mean, look at this guy. He's making you a meal, he's wearing the hat and everything. How could you kill Columbo? Actually, thinking about it, how could you kill Columbo?
That's the poison glass, sir. The glass I was supposed to drink.
Make Me a Perfect Murder is one that I really enjoyed. The assistant of a television executive is also his lover, but when he gets a major promotion, he will not consider her for his old job. Trish Van Devier's character is one of the calmest characters we've ever seen, yet it becomes apparent that that's all internalized. Columbo gets a crash course on how television networks work.
Is there any way I can be of help, Lieutenant?
I don't believe so, ma'am. Nice of you to offer. We think it's a whiplash.
No, I meant, is there any way I can help you with your investigation?
And also how television production worked, where for some odd reason, in one of the longest episodes ever, Columbo sits at a mixing desk and watches a ballet of waveforms on a monitor. I'm not making that up. Lainey Kazan appears as a troubled star, while Lawrence Luckenbill seems to be reading an early draft of Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. But as it's a very early draft from the late 70s, it still has the line, "Why does God need a Winnebago?" This one is easily my favourite episode from the tail end of 70s Columbos.
And there is a connection. I'm pretty sure of that.
How to Dial a Murder has another killer psychiatrist. Here he trains as 2 Doberman to kill his friend over an affair with his late wife. It's easily the most horrific murder out of the 70s run, though Nicole Williamson's character has all of the charm of an infected boil. His house guest is Kim Cattrall, who's clearly got a one-way crush thing happening. Trisha O'Neill is a dog trainer, while Ed Begley Jr. is a cop looking after the dogs. And the killer Shrink is quite happy to try and poison his beloved dogs, and when that doesn't work, he tries to get them to kill Columbo. Why you want to kill Columbo? He's so jolly, and he's really good at transporting hamburgers in the rain under his coat.
Oh, yes, yes.
The conspirator starts with an Irish poet buying guns for the IRA, but he decides the arms dealer is going to double-cross him, so he's gonna die. It's a fairly lifeless episode to close the books on the 1970s version of Columbo. NBC changed management, decided they'd be fine if Columbo just ended. Acceding to Peter Falk's increasing demands each season had reached a limit.
Well, now that you mention it, sir, he did tell me to keep my eyes open.
Mrs. Columbo had never been seen in any episode of Columbo. We'd often hear mention of her name, but every time she was expected to attend an event, there was always some excuse. Mrs. Columbo couldn't be here because she was away working on an oil rig, or she was not able to attend your party because her unit was deployed overseas. Or Mrs. Columbo is here, but until we discover what went wrong with the invisibility experiment, you'll just have to take our word for it.
I got somebody checking it out right now.
After a long break, original Columbo co-creator William Link had returned with a new set of mysteries starring everyone's favourite sweet detective with poor posture. And no, it's not Sergeant Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Toblerone. Columbo goes to the guillotine, has a psychic trying to get work with the government by killing a skeptical illusionist from his past who could expose him, while Columbo pops up and learns about magic tricks and fake guillotines.
No, sir, I need at least one more piece of evidence, and if I know you, sir, you're not going to give it to me.
Anthony Andrews and Anthony Zerbe are the guest stars in this new-look Columbo. Columbo looked a little more weather-beaten after 10 years. While the idea was to make the new Columbo episodes exactly the same as the 70s episodes, things had moved on, and so the contrast between old Columbo and new Columbo, or Columbo and the world around him, might be jarring to some. Also, if you've ever complained about a series being rebooted instead of just being exactly the same just years later, well, here is what that looks like.
That's a Phillips head screw. That's a completely different kind of screw.
Murder, Smoke and Shadows has Fisher Stevens as a Hollywood director with a talent for special effects who kills an old friend who can expose his past. Columbo rocks up to investigate the Spielberg-like director, and for me, I always enjoyed any episode set at a television or a movie studio. But now we're in the era of pastel colours and glass tiles and kitsch retro memorabilia. The killing is kinda cool, though the way Columbo lays out the gotchas at the end is one of the most over-the-top, with people taking their bows, and Columbo even having a wardrobe change for a nice flourish. This episode also has some really atmospheric lighting in places. Atmospheric lighting is always welcome, anytime cameras are involved. Except for an endoscopy.
That was strange, sir.
Sex and the Married Detective is where a sex therapist kills her cheating lover by creating a call girl persona as an alter ego so she can walk around in plain sight at an event. The episode has darker overtones than most episodes, especially when the therapist seems to be finding it hard to put away her call girl character. While this is mainly a dark episode, it balances the books with some light-hearted moments. Columbo talking to a cleaner, or Columbo playing an impromptu jam session on a tuba, or all of the sex therapists going to Columbo for relationship advice. Babylon 5's Peter Jurasik was one of the therapists. The problem with people with alter egos is that you never know who to send the bill to. On the plus side, somebody with an alter ego makes collecting enough signatures on a petition that much faster. Grand Deceptions closes out the first year of a revived Columbo with Robert Foxworth, the head of a military think tank, who kills a colleague who has evidence of his siphoning off funds to his own end. This episode is probably the first time in a Columbo where the crime scene investigation scenes feel like an actual procedural thing was being adhered to compared to what you saw in the original run. For example, there's none of this tainting a crime scene with your breakfast happening here.
You wouldn't even want to think about the amount of paperwork for murder.
Murder, a self-portrait, has a famous artist having an affair with his model under the nose of his current wife while his ex-wife lives next door, which does sound like the setup of that infamous short-lived 80s sitcom. However, the artist's ex wants to remarry and the artist is concerned that she will reveal the secret of an earlier murder, so he kills her.
Well, I guess we can call that an unconventional lifestyle, sir.
The last act is Columbo sitting for his portrait while recordings of the dead woman outlining her dreams to her shrink reveal the artist's motive. Peter Falk always seems to get a kick out of being the person most out of place in any scene, like a goth at spring break.
I don't understand.
The 70s series occasionally had episodes that would wrap up very quickly. By the 90s, episodes will often have a much more drawn-out scene where Columbo and the killer are in a room together and Columbo lays out the entire crime.
I warn you, I intend to paint your policeman's soul.
The episode Columbo Cries Wolf looked like it was going to be a trashy episode about a Hugh Hefner-styled character played by Ian Buchanan, who may have killed his business partner played by Deirdre Hall, except we only see parts of it, which looks like a murder, but not the details, so at best it's only a missing persons case. There's no body.
Our paging beepers. Since Anne and I are the only two who know the numbers, when it beeps, we know who it is and that it's important.
Columbo's investigation is built up into a big media storm when the apparent murder victim turns up, and Columbo is publicly humiliated. But then, when Hall's character goes missing again, Columbo tells the killer that he will probably get away with it, but could he just use his phone?
Did you hear that?
And this has one of the all-time best gotchas, since it wasn't plucked out of the air in the last few minutes. Again, another Columbo that only really exists because somebody came into contact with some new technology.
Is that what you're implying, Columbo?
I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you to help me.
A high-powered attorney working for a political campaign kills an old acquaintance who can incriminate him, but despite having a meticulous plan to avoid detection, the stupid git takes a bite of some cheese and leaves it behind at the crime scene. This was the sort of clue that Peter Falk used to love, and he would take note of anything like this that could be used if he read it in a magazine or a newspaper article or a book.
Make sure the boys put that aside when they're done with it, because that's going to travel.
Patrick McGoohan directed and played the killer, where he starts off annoyed by Columbo, but later becomes amused by the lieutenant. I dig, it happens to me a lot when I rock up to a company picnic in the park with a plate of homemade potato salad and a bottle of cheap wine. You know, people are deeply resentful of my presence at first, but later they warm up. One of these days I might even try going to my own company's picnic. Patrick McGoohan shared Peter Falk's intensity on set and in striving to make the films better. But anecdotally, Patrick McGoohan would do this in a way that would often rub his colleagues the wrong way.
What makes it go?
You dial in a number just like a telephone. Press start, that's all.
Rest in peace, Mrs. Columbo is the ultimate hype and tease to something that didn't actually happen. The episode makes you think things have not gone so well for Mrs. Columbo. A real estate agent played by Helen Shaver kills her boss for reasons going back to her late husband's death in prison. Columbo shows up to investigate, and he of course is suspicious of her, but the twist is she wants him on the case since Columbo had been the one to arrest her husband years earlier. The pair play a game of cat and mouse where Columbo knows she did it and that she's gunning for him, but he has to play along to see how it will all play out.
Oh, I want you to nod your head a lot and keep saying yes, sir.
Why, sir?
Not why, sir. Yes, sir. And pardon my tone of voice.
The killer gives Columbo poisoned marmalade for Mrs. Columbo, and after her apparent funeral, the killer also thinks she's poisoned our favourite gas station lettuce.
I don't think so, man.
It was all a ploy. Mrs. Columbo wasn't dead. This wasn't even Columbo's house, and the photo's actually Columbo's sister-in-law. Mrs. Columbo is alive and well and at home with the flu. Ian McShane is neither the killer nor the victim, and at this point in his career in American programs, he was still a supporting character playing the killer's alibi. Poor Lovejoy just can't catch a break. So in the episode Rest in Peace, Mrs. Columbo doesn't actually appear because she was sick. But that may or may not have been the truth. Apparently, after the gamma ray incident, she'd had to undergo a stint of court-ordered anger management training.
Besides which, you wanted to kill my wife and you would have killed me. I take that very personally.
Uneasy Lies the Crown was an old Stephen Bochco story resurrected for a new Columbo. A dentist kills a movie star that his wife was having an affair with by poisoning him with digitalis contained in a hollowed-out crown. Columbo's impressed by the killer's celebrity friends, and the killer's amused by Columbo, who lets on fairly early on that he knows the dentist did it. The final gotcha, though, is more of a bluff than a clever bit of plotting.
Forget it. Just forget it, will you?
The thing about this episode is, to anybody who's not a dentist but has been to a dentist, they all want to see the evil dentist being led away by the cops.
Nobody loves the dentist.
So, the moral of the story is, brush twice a day, don't forget to floss, and make sure you leave a copy of your dental records with your lawyer.
You think that I murdered Adam Evans? I do, sir.
Murder in Malibu sees a writer murdered by her boyfriend, but he's found a way to avoid arrest by shooting her and then coming back half an hour later and shooting her with a different gun and admitting to the second shooting.
Just shot a dead body.
I once tried something similar when I tried to drill a hole in the wall, and half an hour later I had to get somebody who knew what they were doing to come and drill a hole in the wall.
There's no law against shooting a dead body.
Andrew Stevens is the boyfriend that every woman in the episode goes gaga over, while Brenda Vaccaro was once considered the ideal Mrs. Columbo. Here she played the sister of the victim. And this is an episode solved by Columbo showing his expertise in women's underwear.
Well, here, let me show you on these panties.
Columbo Goes to College is about a pair of college frat boys who are about to be flunked by their professor at the same time that Columbo has been invited to give talks about criminal investigation to the same professor's class. The frat boys kill the professor during Columbo's lecture with a remote-controlled gun, and then stick to Columbo playing the role of enthusiastic students. Their arrogance leads them to try and manipulate the guy that they think is not all that smart.
You know what I gotta do?
We've seen suspects treat Columbo with disdain before, but you can see Columbo's disappointment when he realizes that they are toying with him.
Do you think Columbo's parents were related?
These guys are possibly some of the most odious killers in the entire series. Ones when they're being defiantly let off is actually quite satisfying for the viewer.
And then they assign this rumpled little dumbbell to find his killer.
Robert Culp makes his fourth appearance in the Columbo, the first since the early 70s, but here he's just an arrogant dad of one of the killers.
That's not an insult, it's a statement of fact.
George Hamilton is a true crime television presenter who's being extorted to quit by a rival lest he be exposed for appearing in porno films. Yeah, I know, poor choice of words. There are clues galore, cigarettes stubbed out differently, a doctored security camera tape, a computer printout of a news story, but it's really an excuse for super smooth George Hamilton to contrast with Peter Falk and his shabby chic detective.
This is like the fingerprints being on only one side of the paper instead of on both. It opens up all kinds of questions.
A former rock star is murdered by her high-flying lawyer husband, but it takes Columbo to put the clues together regarding champagne corks, the victim's framed lover, and the new idea of photos being printed on a speeding ticket.
You don't think he did it?
I don't think he did it.
However, while Columbo proves how the crime could have been committed and the gotcha itself is cool,
that's just a photograph.
The killer's apparent alibi seems plucked from the heavens just to make the gotcha pop. Columbo has a sidekick for part of the episodes, played by Sondra Curry, whose partner Alan J. Levy was a producer on Columbo and of course the director, while Falk's own wife Shira Denise made another appearance. And also a disappearance after the couple had a very blazing row on set.
Appreciate you coming out, sir. It makes it easier to explain.
Working with family is tough. I once invited my cousin Chuck to appear on a Sopranos podcast I once hosted, but there was a typo on the invite, and instead we ended up talking for an hour about which was the worst saxophone. Also, this episode has a random cameo from Little Richard.
You also implying that maybe I had something to do with it?
Yes, sir. I think that's a real possibility.
Rip Torn is a high-end jeweler on the verge of bankruptcy who hatches a plan to steal the lottery winnings from his nephew, who wants to hide the win from his soon-to-be ex-wife.
I just won $30 million in the lottery.
Yes, I can see how that could be a problem for you, Freddie.
The uncle kills the nephew while he's also having an affair with the nephew's ex. Well, that's going to make for an incredibly awkward wake. Columbo's on the scene, investigating clues, but also debating what to buy his wife for their 25th wedding anniversary, which sees Columbo rekindling his affinity for ladies' underwear.
But why he was wearing it?
As for winning the lottery, the lesson is don't tell your uncle first. Now, I've made sure that I've told nobody about my first 5 lottery jackpot wins, but then I got cocky and told Uncle Reg about the 6th win, and well, there's just no easy way to avoid the business proposals at family get-togethers. I'm clearly a soft touch, otherwise I wouldn't be an investor in an alpaca farm. And who knew alpacas were so poor at growing kiwi fruit?
Yeah.
Peter Falk had always complained about how hard it was to get good Columbo scripts, so at one point he optioned a few stories by crime writer Ed McBain, despite his stories being very different to a typical Columbo. No time to die sees Columbo at the wedding of his nephew, Guy from Melrose Place, with Mrs. Columbo again not able to attend. She was possibly whitewater rafting in South America or visiting a sick mother or some shit like that. The bride goes missing and the episode is a race against time to try and find her before the sicko kidnapper has his way with her and then kills her. It's not a terrible episode, but it doesn't really feel like a Columbo episode. It feels like an antimatter Columbo, because, you know, if Columbo and anti-Columbo mix, Well, that's not good. Because it is so atypical as a Columbo, fans tend to really be down on this episode. And in this episode, the only person to actually die is the kidnapper. At the very least, this episode allows the Columbo series to rectify a terrible long-running injustice. But of course, it took until the 1990s to right this awful wrong. But finally, it's Lance.
You're breaking my heart.
A Bird in the Hand is another variation on the standard Columbo, and it's also an episode where Peter Falk doesn't seem to be in much of the episode. A gambler on a losing streak plans to kill his rich uncle by planting a bomb under his car until the uncle is killed in a hit and run while jogging. I mean, the uncle was out jogging, not that he was hit and run by a jogger anyway. So while the cops are investigating the uncle's death, the nephew can't get near the uncle's car to remove the bomb, which means this happens. Columbo, of course, is on the case. In fact, he was on the scene. During this episode, he makes a nuisance of himself at a car dealership. Well, about as much of a nuisance as you can be at a car dealer without earning a commission. The bulk of the episode is actually the nephew and the widow dancing around each other, which is complicated by the nephew turning up dead. Steve Forrest, Tyne Daly, and Greg Evigan appear, but Bear is nowhere to be seen, possibly because he made off with the truck.
Oh my God. Dolores?
Just shut up.
Peter Falk always had an interest in fiddling with Columbo scripts. But back in the 70s, he tried to write an episode himself, but he could never make it work. It's All in the Game is where Peter Falk finally produced a script of his own in an episode where you're not always sure how far Columbo has fallen down a well.
You already got raisins on that peanut butter. You're gonna put jam on? You've never had it that way? No, and if there's a God, I never will.
Faye Dunaway conspires with a young woman to kill the ne'er-do-well who's been seeing both of them, and then Columbo shows up. Faye Dunaway's character thinks the best way to get Columbo off the scent, give him something else to think about. And what happens is the pair not only become friends after she starts flirting shamelessly with him, but they may even like each other.
I'm attracted to you. Nice head of hair.
Columbo always had fairly big name guest stars, but they were often best known for television roles. Faye Dunaway, on the other hand, was by far the biggest movie star to appear in a Columbo to date. Is Columbo going to stray from his wife, Mrs. Columbo, or is he stringing along the suspect the same way she was with him? The answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Claudia Christian from Babylon 5 was the co-conspirator that Columbo lets off after Faye Dunaway's character confesses. After all of the confusion, Columbo ends the episode the way you'd hoped he would.
Where you going?
Thursday night. Taking the wife bowling.
Mrs. Columbo does not appear in the episode, but she may have been off gigging as a session musician where she played bass on Mariah Carey's single, All I Want for Christmas Is You.
You believe everything a cop tells you, you're a damn fool.
Butterfly in Shades of Grey has William Shatner doing the perfect caricature of William Shatner as performed by dozens of impressionists over the years.
The windows don't open. Forget the smell. What was the one thing you didn't find?
He's a radio talk show blowhard who kills one of his employees for helping the host's daughter to possibly land a publishing deal. Of course, Columbo's soon on the case, and on the suspect's case. We're back to the days of the suspect showing heightened irritation at Columbo's methods.
I told you this morning, and I'm telling you now, stay out of my life.
Perhaps channeling Shatner's own frustrations at being asked the same question over and over again at Star Trek conventions.
What the hell are you talking about?
Today's newfangled gadget, the cellular phone. Columbo's fascinated and slightly concerned by using mobile phones.
You know, there's people that are saying that you can get cancer from those things, the radiation in your ear.
And of course, poor cellular reception is the gotcha to nab the suspect, who was almost about to shoot Columbo.
You know, Columbo, I think possibly I may have misread you.
There's also a random appearance from Pamela Stevenson. In Undercover, Columbo goes undercover, which in this case means he puts on a clean shirt.
You will have to change clothes. I look forward to it.
This is an episode that's another non-traditional story, in that it's A, not about rich people, B, Columbo goes undercover and gets clobbered, and C, it's more of a traditional mystery where Columbo and his team are trying to piece together clues from a treasure map that points to loot from an armed robbery from years earlier. It has quite the cast of Ed Begley Jr., Burt Young, Kristen Bauer, Harrison Page, and Tyne Daly. This also has the highest body count of Columbo with something like 4 killings, which is something that we're going to add to the Columbo Memometer.
Drop the gun.
Undercover Columbo is no longer deferential or vague. He's more hard-boiled Columbo, which, while it was good for Peter Falk as an actor to stretch himself, for the audience, This story could have featured almost any detective. Well, maybe not almost any detective. I mean, Hercule Poirot trying to fit in on Skid Row may have been a stretch. A lot of cop shows were interchangeable. You literally could have the same plot in multiple series. But that never worked with Columbo. As soon as you took the Columbo out of a Columbo episode, you ended up with something that was a really disappointing Columbo.
This half. That's right, that half.
Strange Bedfellows is about Norm! Sorry, a horse farm owner who kills his gambling-addicted brother, frames the bookie his brother was indebted to, and then kills him as well, but ignores the fact that the bookie might be connected. George Wendt was and is always going to be known as that easygoing schlub Norm from 11 Years on Cheers, but here he's allowed to play against type as an odious villain. Either Columbo nails Norm for the killing, George Wendt's character, or this mobster does. Rod Steiger was another fairly big film actor doing a Columbo guest shot, as a character who has no problem threatening to kill somebody in front of a cop.
You can't just let them kill me! I'm sorry, sir. I gotta look out for myself.
Again, the ending is basically beating a confession out of a suspect, making a suspect in fear for his life in order for Columbo to wrap up the case. Is George Wendt miscast? Some would say yes, I would say maybe. He is an actor playing a different type of character to the sort he was known for. But at the time, there were a few people associated with the series who really disagreed with the casting. This is more of a proper Columbo after the alternating run of experimental episodes.
I just don't want you to feel insulted when I tell you to leave.
By now, Columbo episodes were being broadcast as and when they were needed or finished, and sometimes there were quite long gaps between new episodes.
You get some fancy lawyer to save you on a technicality, he won't be saving you.
A Trace of Murder is a clever Columbo story where a wife wants to rid herself of her rich husband without going through a messy divorce. Her plan, instead of killing the husband, she and her lover will kill his business rival and frame the husband.
Care for a banana?
Oh, hey, thanks.
And then the forensics team supervisor ends up being the killer. Well, that's certainly a twist. It's a twisted twist of a pretzel playing Twister while Ferris Bueller's Day Off is on the television. Barry Corbin was the victim, Mrs. Falk, Sheridan East was his wife, and David Rashi became the second Sledgehammer regular to appear in a Columbo.
That cat could be the only witness to this terrible crime. I want that cat.
It's a solid Columbo, and by that I don't mean it's an effigy made from marble. Having said that, I'm just checking Etsy if anyone makes marble Columbos. For a second, I did think I had found somebody who sold marble Columbos, but that turned out to be a typo. Probably for the best because the shipping would have been a killer. One more thing. For some reason, this episode has an extended epilogue where Columbo explains how he pieced together the crime after the perps have been arrested, despite the fact that his buddies really don't seem to give two shits and are just humouring this old guy Columbo until he settles his bar tab. Perhaps, maybe, Columbo does have a reputation for getting a little rowdy if you don't listen to his stories about how he solved the crime.
How did they get there? Somebody put them there.
Ashes to Ashes is a rather dark story where Patrick McGoohan kills Rue McClanahan and cremates the body. I mean, the characters played by those actors, but you know what I mean. I'm not making any accusations.
Can you look at it?
Yes, I can.
An upscale funeral director kills a gossip columnist who's going to expose his misdeeds. But of course, in the spirit of so many Columbo victims, the columnist tells the killer what they're going to do ahead of time, but they haven't told anybody else. That's a rookie move. It's a fun, macabre Columbo, very much a classic style story, though Patrick McGoohan often added a touch of absurdity to his episodes, and sometimes just a tad too much silliness.
When a body meets a body.
Like what happens when Aunt Ethel gets at the gin. I mean, there's a reason we call her Methyl Ethel.
Perhaps you care to join me.
Well, that's up to you, sir. It's, your funeral.
Murder with Too Many Notes is about a movie composer who kills his assistant who had been ghostwriting his best work, where he drugs him, places on the top of a cargo lift or on the roof, and, well, it's just not that amazing. Patrick McGoohan directed, with Scottish comedian Billy Connolly appearing as the killer. Connolly is a fantastically funny man, though this is meant to be a dramatic role. Though throughout, I would just keep remembering his fantastic stand-up routines in the thickest, most impenetrable Scottish accent this side of Hadrian's Wall.
Wham!
Murder with Too Many Notes feels a bit lifeless, much like the victim after his fall. It's just one of the dullest episodes where it's not actively terrible, but there's just little zing or spark. Unless, of course, you're watching the episode while covered in a poorly maintained electric blanket that's shorting out because your waterbed has sprung a leak.
You never remember it, but you do recall what it depicts.
The episode sat on the shelf for a few years after filming was completed, but when it was eventually screened, it rated quite well. So, how about one more thing?
I wouldn't say so, Sergeant.
Oh.
Not yet.
By the time Columbo returned for another episode, most of the production crew had since moved on to other projects. But the idea for this episode was pitched, and of course Peter Falk loved the idea of setting a Columbo in the world of raves and nightclubs. The son of a mobster is accidentally killed by his ex-wife, who's seeing a nightclub promoter whose latest venture had been bankrolled by the deceased. Then we have Columbo attending raves, sticking his hand down toilets and smelling the breath of a corpse. And while the milk was technically still before its expiration date, it did have a bit of a whiff about it. The network by now was wanting something that could appeal to a younger audience. Columbo likes the nightlife, feels like Columbo has been rebooted for the early 2000s, but nobody bothered to tell Peter Falk not to show up.
I don't get it.
Stylistically, it feels like no other Columbo, with electronic music and fancy visuals, ending with using high technology to find a corpse under a fish tank. British actor Matthew Rhys is one of the killers, in an early role for him in a US production. He had intended to do an American accent, but when Peter Falk first heard his attempt, he suggested that he stick to his standard Welsh accent. Ouch. It's an okay episode rather than a spectacular one, but all good things must end, and that's where Columbo ended.
You really are something else, Lieutenant.
Why do you say that?
As well as our look at the series. So out of the 69 Columbo television movies, only a very few were not very good. Most of them were highly watchable. Now, you may have a preference for the 70s episodes or the 90s episodes, but there are good and bad sprinkled throughout each era, so I'll just give you my own personal preference on which episodes I liked and which ones I didn't. The least engaging were things like Old-Fashioned Murder, because it just seemed so meandering and sluggish and not very logical.
Gee, I forgot about that.
Last Salute to the Commodore just felt like it was written, performed, directed and edited while everybody was either incredibly drunk or incredibly hungover, which does sound like the day after parent-teacher evening. Matter of Honor appears in this list for making a Matador story into a matter of boredom. Murder in Malibu is like what happens when Google Maps has a freakout. It's just all over the place. Undercover and No Time to Die, because they were adapted from a completely un-Columbo-esque source material and really just don't work as Columbo episodes. Murder with Too Many Notes for just being dull.
It's true, it's true.
And as for a personal list of great Columbos, Columbo Cries Wolf, Columbo Goes to College, Rest in Peace Mrs. Columbo, Make Me a Perfect Murder, Negative Reaction, Forgotten Lady, Now You See Him, Etude in Black, and Ashes to Ashes, which was the last, if not great, last really good Columbo. But the pick for my all-time favourite episode, and mainly just because of Donald Pleasance, Any Old Port in a Storm.
Oh, I'm sorry, there is no such thing as a perfect murder. That's just an illusion.
And that's Columbo. Oh, and there is no one more thing. So if you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.